How's it going, everybody? So I watched the Kresser versus Joel Kahn debate on Joe Rogan's podcast, like the day that it came out. Okay, I was very excited for this. However, I didn't want to make a video reviewing my opinions on it simply because it's a very sketchy topic. All right, population studies and observational trials and things. It's a very complicated matter that most people won't understand. Vegans are going to want to believe what they believe, and paleo people want to believe what they believe. They don't care about how credible the evidence is, and that's exactly the problem here. In this debate, Kresser did an amazing job of explaining why population studies and food questionnaire observations are very weak evidence to base your dietary beliefs on. He emphasized the fact that population studies are useful, and so are observational trials, but they must be taken with extreme grain of salt, extreme skepticism, and you have to ask further questions. Essentially, population studies and observational trials and things like this, much of the time they present only some of the information, but not enough information to really know what's going on. For example, red meat causes heart disease based on a population study, right? Like in Japan, they have, or how about in America, they have high rates of heart disease, right? We found that people in America have really high rates of heart disease, and people in red meat eating countries have higher rates of heart disease than people with low meat consumption. Well, the fact is, countries with low meat consumption usually don't eat red meat because they're too poor to afford red meat. And in those countries, infectious diseases kills them off before heart disease. So maybe if they lived long enough to develop heart disease, their poverty diet based on grains could possibly cause heart disease in the long run. Whereas America, we drop dead of heart disease. Red meat, the more people eat red meat, the more heart disease they have. Maybe that's because the more red meat people eat, the more French fries, sodas, potato chips, and beer people eat and drink, right? The more junk people eat on the side, because all the barbecues I've been to where people are grilling red meat, everyone's sucking down sodas like they're water. Everyone's eating potato chips. Everyone that I know that eats a lot of red meat, they eat it in the form of hamburgers with French fries and sodas. Even the fit people, they get big ass value meals and whatnot. And these are factors that are not accounted for in a lot of food questionnaires or population studies. They just say, oh, they're eating more red meat and they have more heart disease. Generally, people who want to be healthier and are watching what they eat and they're being health conscious, they believe red meat is bad for them, so they naturally avoid red meat. And so if they're health conscious, they're also going to avoid French fries and sodas. So is it that the red meat is bad, or is it that these people are allowing themselves to eat all the junk that comes on the side of it? It just so happens that the more red meat people eat, the more junk food they're probably also exposed to. And the less red meat people eat, the more health conscious they usually are. How many people go to a hamburger place and order a chicken burger? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people do. Anyway, this is also the other thing that Chris Kresser pointed out is that people oftentimes forget what they eat. So like in food questionnaires, they'll ask you, how many times do you eat red meat per week in the last 4 years? How many people remember how many times they've eaten red meat in the last 4 years? Not a lot of people. How many people remember what they had for breakfast, 3 weeks ago? Like, a lot of people don't, unless you eat the same thing every single day. So food questionnaires, it's, if you've ever done one of those studies yourself and been in one of those experiments, you'll know just how much people lie, or how much people forget. And also, a lot of times unhealthy people, it's actually been reported that unhealthy people underreport the junk food they're eating and over-report the healthy food. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of flaws in these studies. And the problem is most of the studies that Joel Kahn was referencing, and also most vegans reference, are these weak studies, these observational trials and population studies. And the thing is, there's population data that we can use to prove that heart disease or that meat doesn't cause disease. For example, just recently Hong Kong came out with a report saying that they've got like the lowest or the highest life expectancy in the world, yet they eat so much red meat. They've got one of the highest consumption of red meat in the world. They also eat a lot of other stuff too that's kind of bad. But again, population studies is a useful tool, but it only raises more questions. Like, okay, so they have the most heart disease. They also eat the most red meat. They also eat a lot of vegetable oils. They eat more. They drink more sodas. You know, another. You know, like Asian countries are healthier. You know, and they're also all Asian, and they also live near the on the other side of Russia. You know, so maybe living on the other side of Russia has something to do with it, because all of they have low rates of disease and they live on the other side of Russia. Like, correlation does not equal causation. Is basically the big kicker here. And Joel Kahn, there's actually a video breaking down how many times Joel Kahn tried to avoid the question when he was asked, why do what's wrong with Chris Kresser's studies? Joel Kahn just kept going over and over and over again, because in order to admit that Chris Kresser's studies were flawed, Joel Kahn would have to admit that his studies are flawed as well. Anyway, it was a very interesting debate, and I think that Chris Kresser did very well. And it's probably one of the only debates I've seen where it's vegan versus somebody who, he's not really just a meat eater, but vegan versus non-vegan, right? The only time where I've seen a non-vegan do really, really well at promoting the fact that meat isn't necessarily bad. But the key here is that Chris Kresser is not a carnivore. He's not a predominantly meat-based person. He promotes balance that just includes red meat as well. He's about food as medicine, and that's something that I really like. And I feel like I don't feel like he's tied to an agenda. I don't feel like he's biased. I think that he's an honest researcher, and he does have a master's degree in science. So it would only make sense that he understands science enough to do what he did. And I think that was a very productive debate. It was a very productive session. And it's not just because the meat eater did well. It's just because I know that there's a lot of flaws in veganism, and there's a lot of flaws in the evidence that they use to promote vegan health benefits. And he did a very good job of exposing those flaws. But Joel Kahn did a very good job of, representing his case as well. It just so happens that, Chris Kresser knows those flaws in vegan evidence, and he knows them very thoroughly. And he did a very good job of opening that up. So again, I don't think veganism is necessarily bad, especially for ethics and the planet and things. What I do think is that people who believe veganism is the healthiest thing ever, and people who believe that red meat consumption is unhealthy, they need to look further into things. And so if you really want to see the debate, the best thing that you can do is actually watch Chris Masterjohn's breakdown. He did a really good job of breaking it down, and there were a lot of it's a great summary, basically. Chris Masterjohn has a PhD in nutrition, I believe. He has a PhD. I think it was in nutrition. Maybe I'm wrong. maybe it's a PhD in like history. That would suck. But he did a good job breaking down the main points and a lot of my thoughts. And I believe it was What I've Learned that summarized Chris Masterjohn's thoughts and Chris Kresser's thoughts. He did a great job of that. So I would watch What I've Learned, I'd watch his video to summarize all the points, so you don't have to watch the entire debate. But watch the entire debate if you can. I watched it several times, and I watched it slowly, and I picked apart certain parts, and I just watched it very thoroughly because I'm very interested. I want to know the truth, and that was a good place to look. So leave your questions in the comments down below. Let me know, did you watch the debate? And if you did, what is your thoughts? What is your opinions? Thank you. Have a great day. Subscribe.